Somewhere in a quiet office building in Oslo, a fund manager is approving the purchase of government bonds from a country he has never visited, issued by a government he has never spoken to be held for the next 30 years by workers who have never heard his name. They just know it as their pension. Somewhere in Frankfurt, a central bank is buying its own government's debt, purchasing the promise that the government will repay itself. And nobody in the room finds this strange anymore. This is how the world's debt actually works, not through shadowy figures or secret arrangements, through a quiet, almost invisible system that most people interact with every single day without knowing it. So first things first, when people say world debt, they usually imagine some villain in a tower somewhere holding an IOU for the entire planet. But that's not how any of this works. World debt is just a total of everything borrowed globally that hasn't been paid back yet. And that number right now sits somewhere around $300 trillion. Corporate debt, household debt, all of it combined. To put that into perspective, the entire global economy produces about 100 trillion in goods and services every year. So the world owes roughly 3 times what it makes in a year. See, think of it like fuel in the tank. Debt is just fuel. Some countries, companies, and people used it well. Some used it to buy things they couldn't afford. But either way, someone had to supply the fuel. And that's where it gets interesting, because that someone is almost certainly you. And this is where it gets personal for most people. Pension funds are pools of money collected from workers and employers to pay future retirement benefits. Insurance companies collect premiums and invest them into long-term assets. Both of them need safe, predictable long-term income. And that means bonds, which are basically tradable IOUs that governments and companies issue to borrow money, promising to pay it back with interest. In some rich countries, pension funds and insurance companies together own close to half of the domestic bond market. So if you have a pension or life insurance policy, part of your money right now is sitting in government debt from a country you may have never thought about. The third layer is foreign governments and foreign wealth funds. Sovereign wealth funds are state-owned investment pools, usually built from trade surpluses that buy assets globally. Think of them like a country's savings account invested in other countries' debt. Some of the largest sovereign wealth funds manage trillions of dollars each. The fourth layer is large asset managers. These are firms that pool money from millions of investors worldwide and invest it into bonds, stocks, and other assets. Some of the largest of these firms each manage over $10 trillion in assets, more than the entire GDP of most countries on Earth. When a firm that size moves into bond markets, it creates gravitational pull. When it moves out, it creates earthquakes. And because they manage money on behalf of pension funds, insurance companies, and ordinary investors, they sit at the center of the entire ownership web. And then there is the fifth layer, which is you. Whether you know it or not, most people in rich countries don't own bonds directly, but through retirement accounts, mutual funds, and bond ETFs, which are basically funds that trade like stocks and hold thousands of bonds inside them. Ordinary people are quietly financing governments and corporations all over the world. You put money into a safe investment fund. That fund buys bonds. Those bonds finance a government spending. You are, without realizing it, one of the creditors of the world debt. And here's what makes the whole system so strange. The world isn't really in debt to some external creditor. It's largely in debt to itself. Countries lend to each other. Central banks buy their own government debt. Workers' pension savings finance the governments those same workers live under. And money flows from surplus countries to deficit countries through bonds and gets collected and then flows back again. It's a giant recycling machine, turning savings in one part of the world into spending in another, over and over, continuously. And when you step back from the mechanics of it, the bonds and the funds and the central bank balance sheets, what you're really looking at is something stranger than any of the numbers suggest. Debt at its core is a claim on the future. Every bond ever issued is a promise that tomorrow will be productive enough to honor what was borrowed today. The entire 300 trillion structure of the world debt rests on a single assumption: that the future will keep generating enough value to service the past. For most of human history, that assumption held. Economies grew and populations expanded. But what happens when that changes? What happens when demographics shift, growth slows, and the future becomes less certain than the debt load it's supposed to carry? We don't have a clean answer to that yet. What we do know is that the ownership of this debt spread across pension funds and central banks means that when the question finally becomes urgent, it won't be distant financial institutions that feel it first. It will be the person in Oslo whose pensions hold the bonds, the worker in Frankfurt whose savings are invested in government promises, the retiree who spent 40 years contributing to a fund that quietly owns a slice of the world's debt. The system had borrowed from all of them, and the system's answer to that debt will land on all of them too. $300 trillion is not an abstraction. It is a direct claim, and the question of whether it can be honored is, quietly, the most important financial question of our time.